Hi everybody, it's Aisling here and I'm delighted to welcome you all to another podcast. And this podcast actually came about following from our wonderful client Owen, who's an adolescent who has lost, I think he lost about 18 kilos and he was absolutely amazing and so honest and open about his journey and the triggers and what was causing the weight. So this podcast is going to be a series of 3 and we're calling it Connecting the Dots for a reason, because it's all about awareness and trying to find out why particularly adolescents we're talking about today are overeating in the first place. So I am absolutely honoured and over the moon and so grateful to be joined for this series by our guest speaker, and it's my first guest speaker, so thank you, Stewie. I'm so excited. And Stewie's a very good old friend of myself and Paul's also. And Stuart is a behavioural psychotherapist and he specialises in youth and adolescents and family therapy. And he is the founder of Zest Life Therapeutic Services, with 2 therapy centres in Dublin serving families within the Irish community in Dublin and nationwide. He's co-founder and CEO of not-for-profit Zest for Kids, which is a children's charity working alongside his lovely wife Maggie with vulnerable children in Ireland and overseas. Stuart's work with families and particularly young people is recognised nationally, and he's worked with radio and TV, including the award-winning documentary series Pony Kids, which I've seen and I loved it because I love ponies and horses too. I just thought that was amazing. Well worth a watch, guys. And he's appeared regularly on TV. He is a motivational speaker who engages with young people directly in schools and centres. And recently he has been conference host and MC for the Young Social Innovators National Awards, a keynote speaker on the topic of teenage anxiety, and his subsequent article dealing with teenage cyber anxiety was published in the Irish Medical Journal in 2016. So he also, as well as all that, recently spoke at the Mental Weight Health and Wellbeing Summit in Croke Park 2019, and recently held a discussion at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit 2020 with world-renowned wellness expert Dr. Deepak Chopra on the effects of living during the worldwide pandemic and the effects on mental health. So, wow, that's only half the bio. So what a man. That's some bio, Stewie, and welcome. And I really mean it. Thanks for taking the time to come into us today, because I know you're very busy. Currently we have a lot of adolescents coming into the clinic. And I was delighted that you accepted to come in, the invitation, and discuss, because that is your speciality, dealing with adolescents. So we kind of chatted before this podcast, and we were saying to break this down to 3 topics, and these are the 3 main triggers, as we said, joining the dots, or reasons that we find adolescents coming into the clinic are eating, comfort eating. So hopefully I'd be delighted to hear your advice and your help and your thoughts. And if we start with the first one, which we said we talk about body image, comes up, low body image, low self-esteem, and the influence of social media, etc. I'm finding that throughout all the clinics. So what's your take on that, and what are you experiencing in your centres?
Well, first of all, thanks so much. It's absolutely fabulous to be here and to see yourself and Paul. Appreciate the invitation. Thanks for the bio. No matter what anybody ever hears or reads about anything I've done or anything I've ever achieved or what your qualifications might be, the funny thing is, when I get introduced by somebody saying that he's got 5 kids of his own, it's the only bit I get credibility for, to be honest with you. The rest doesn't seem to matter. So the fact that probably some of the things we're going to discuss today, not just are we seeing this in our clinics, Aisling, but we're seeing this in our homes. This is something that I'm seeing amongst my own kids, and these are things that are very relevant in all of our homes right now. So you brought up the issue, obviously, of body image and the relevant issues around that, around self-esteem. And, you know, who would want to be a young person? Any young person listening to this today, you know, it's a difficult world to grow up in right now. And it's very, very different than the world that I would have grown up in. I'm 52 this year, and it's a very different upbringing than I would have had. So I think we've got to be very real about what it is that's happening to our young people and what their experiences are of that. And when we find ourselves as parents or even as clinicians talking to young people saying, well, you know, in my day, we need to stop ourselves because it's a very different day. And you and I probably talk because we know the world pre-social media. We grew up in that world. We know what that was like. The young people listening to this today don't know the difference. So we see two worlds. You know, we see the social media world, we call it the real world and the online world in many ways when I listen to and talk to parents. And it's just the world for our young people watching this, and we seem ancient to them when we talk about the cyber world or we talk about the online world. It's just their world. So I often say to parents, we need to roll up our sleeves, we need to get down and get dirty and get into it and find out about it and know what's going on and understand the pressures on our young people right now, because it is very, very different. And I know we're going to talk about body image and the context of that, but it's probably one of our greatest growth areas, increase areas from a mental health perspective in seeing in young people. And obviously with what you're experiencing here in motivation, it's incredibly impactful on young people's lives and how they see themselves, how they perceive themselves, what they think of when they see them, their world and them in their world is very, very difficult for them in these days. So I think body image is one area we need to talk about, and if we start into that, actually, in some ways, I'd probably start by using the word the culture in which they're growing up, which is, as I say, very different to ours, but we've created this culture and an environment in which they're growing up, which is a pressurized world and an instantaneous world. So everything that they see, they can get very, very quickly. Anything that they want, they can throw their hand to very fast. There's a competitiveness attached to that. And I think, forgive me for saying this to the parents who are listening, but I think we have fed this to a degree. And we've had various different sides of parenting over the year where we've watched our children closely, or we've wanted the best for our children, probably because we've come from the pain of knowing what it's like to have to be without. Many of us growing up in Ireland, going back 20, 30, 40 years, and we want our kids to have everything. So there's a goodness and a kindness behind it, but often I think we add sometimes to the pressure. And I think that's something that we need to kind of be aware of and understand. So the culture of our young people growing up. I've 4 girls and 1 boy, and we used to think that body image is an issue relating to girls predominantly, because that's probably what came into our clinics probably 10 years ago. Very different now, Aisling, and we're seeing literally where it's 1 in 4 are boys. And body image has become such a significant issue for them. And again, the pressures of what they look like, what they should look like, boys as well as girls, is incredibly difficult for them. So I think that culture we need to be aware of. We need to understand it, and rather than moan about it as parents and say, "Oh, it's ridiculous," or "We shouldn't be worrying about that," or or even saying to them things like, "Oh, you're gorgeous, you're amazing, and you're wonderful. Don't be worrying about anything." That's just not relevant for them, because of course they're worrying about it. They're being reminded of it everywhere. So I think that's a significant issue that we've got to address and look at. The social media aspect we'll tip onto in a minute because it's so huge, but I think also then from the culture in which they're growing up, everything that our young people are seeing right now is in their face, is constant, and is reminded. When I was growing up, if you wanted to see the incredible physique of a man and you were a boy and you wanted to kind of go, gosh, that's what I'd look like after weeks in the gym, or this is what you had to go out of your way to find a magazine in a shop somewhere that was too expensive to buy, but it was available. But you saw the chiseled looked guy and you thought, oh gosh, these kids are seeing that everywhere all of the time, and they can't get away from it. So their perception of what a real man or a real girl looks like is totally distorted, totally inaccurate, completely irrelevant, but they're being forced to be fed this to believe that that is the only way they should look. And we see so much pressure from then other kids, and in some ways contained with adults as parents, but we see so much pressure in other kids to be that way, and for other kids are very hard on each other to point out that they're not, or that they should be, or that they're eating too much, or that they shouldn't be eating, and the pressure continues and continues. I get terribly disturbed by adverts that I see for young people to have to view. And if you're in the Instagram world, and you'll see the different types of pop-ups that come up all of the time, they're again advertising what should look like, and so what you should look like, and what will get you there, you know. And as we know, it's why I love what motivation offers, is that we look at the psychology of this. We don't just talk about how to get there. We talk about why you need to, and why it's good to assist ourselves from the inside out as opposed to anything else. So it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot in it.
I'm thinking when you say, Stewie, that the social media, and this is something I myself experience as a parent, and I'm sure you do too, the whole thing of being on their mobile phones, and I heard you recently speaking about this as well, you know, and parents come into us in the clinic and they'll say that, you know, do I take the phone off them? You know, how do I use that as punishment or whatever? And, you know, and I think one thing we say is behaviours are passed on. And for sure, you know, I'd say to parents out there listening as well, I have plenty of adult clients who are giving out to their children for being on the phone, and I see them come in here, they're bringing their children and they're on the phone 24/7, constantly, the whole time that they're here in the room. So behaviours are passed on. That's so important. But I think also, and I heard you speak of it before, to get away from, how do we get our children away from being on their phone, away from this, as you say, we're bombarded with it, we're surrounded. How do we get them away? And I would encourage parents also listening to be the example and go and bring them exercising. You know, and I think you said this in another podcast I heard that is so important, and we say it to parents here with adolescents. Go, you know, you go, say, come on, let's go for a walk. What would you like to do? Let's go for a cycle. You get out on your bike, you know, and you go and go somewhere local. You go for the swim, you go to the beach, and then do it together. Because in my experience, adolescents are crying out for that.
Yeah.
And they mightn't be able to communicate. To me, a lot of the time there's a communication issue between the parent, and we'll talk about relationship with parents in another podcast, but for sure be the example. So there's no point us, as you say, giving out and saying social media, and you know, and or even, you know, even myself, I would do it. I don't mind, that's filtered, you know, which I do think is important. You get that message across if they're younger, but to be the example. You know, there's no point saying don't be on your phone and I'm on it the whole time. So I don't know, have you any other advice for
Yeah, I think, look, you've hit on a really important thing, and I don't want to sound today like I've got it all sorted. I have 5 kids. I'm struggling with this in my house right now. We all are. Yeah. So the reality of what we know, and then the practicality of what we try to apply, is very important to try and link up. And I've kids from 29 down to 10. My youngest has just turned 11. So it is difficult to manage. However, you're absolutely totally right. These aren't childhood or adolescent issues. These are household boundary issues. And very regularly I have parents communicate and talk to me about the fights or the upsets over phone usage. And we hear addiction being mentioned all of the time. Now, I'm not even getting into the categorical diagnostics of addiction here, but generally speaking, if we were to actually really go down that route, we would see that our children are addicted to these devices. And with that, and I see it particularly in younger kids, with that becomes the inability to think straight other than to get the device. And we start to see that develop into patterns of other addiction in other areas as well, because addiction in one area leads to addiction in others at times. And you will see that from the sedate lifestyle of an addicted phone user can quite often become an overeating issue as well. They lead to each other. So we've got to role model this. And it's not easy because we are connected more all of the time. And I know that's changing. Legislation is even changing around that now about the usage of phones at home and work expectations, etc. But we're guilty of this as parents, and we're guilty of spending hours scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, and the numbing effect, which is important because years ago the numbing effect came from watching the TV. Now, TV, in one aspect of it, we have to understand the neuroscience behind this. TV from the context of numbing, so just zoning out, wanting to not be present is fine. But the biology of the television, what it does to our neuroscience from the context of watching TV is it has megapixels. It doesn't have a backlight. It's not affecting the central nervous system in the same way that watching a screen with a backlight will. So an iPad, a phone, a computer, laptop, they will affect the central nervous system. They will overproduce cortisol in the central nervous system. And what do we do when we increase our cortisol? We get stressed. Our serotonin levels drop, which is our moods. When our serotonin levels drop and our stresses are high, we go to comfort. The brain goes down a route which has to of least resistance, and that route turns into coping strategies. And one of the coping strategies that we're talking about, obviously, is overeating or going into another. Kids don't have the developed brain to understand this in the context. Any kids listen to this, don't take that wrong. You're developing all the way through until you're 25, until you're fully in your cortex and you're established your patterns, right? So it's developing all of the time. So they're reacting from the emotional brain. They're reacting from that sense. That's correct and proper. When kids are in that zone, they're stressed. I call those red zones, by the way. Anybody who listens to my podcast will hear me colour them, just so we keep them straight in our heads. Red zones are where kids sort out their emotions, right? Now, they're what I call the mayhem zones. They're the reactional 0 to 10 upset angry zones. They're the frustration zones. That's when the young person might come in, drop their bag and not want to talk to anyone and take off. They're the zones where they work out their emotions. They don't have the cortex to sit down and talk it through rationally and go, hey mom, I want to talk to you about this for 5 minutes. Had a little bit of an issue in school. This is kind of coming up for me. Can you work this through with me? Can we verbally process it so that at the end of this I can actually, not lose my rag and I can deal with this issue, right? I don't know many adults who do that, never mind young people, okay? They're working out of the red zone behavior, and that is the context that they're in, which is not their fault, it's neurodevelopment, is to bring you as mom or dad into the red zone with them. Now they can get all of those emotions out, all of those feelings out, and as a result of that, they process the emotions. When I say to parents, what normally happens after a red zone, what happens? We go, well, it goes calm and it's nice and peaceful, and then we sort it out and we have a nice chat. I call that a green zone, right? Now, wouldn't it be great if we could do things in green zones? Because actually that's where all the growth is. Wouldn't it be great if we could do things in the green zones and not need the red zones? Now that's life, it's normal and we're going to have them, but what we often work with parents to understand is we actually cause an awful lot of the red zones. We don't do it on purpose. We're not setting out to do it, but we do it by inadvertently doing small things that annoy the kids and pull them towards red zones. So we help parents to understand what that is. The emotions of red zone reactions lead quite often. Now, this sounds a little bit psychologically strange when I say this. Very often kids will create red zones. They don't even know they're doing it, to then need a reactional space. There's consequences from red zones. Usually the consequences, just say they were somebody, you're on your phone too much, that leads to a red zone fight. Usually that then goes into behaviours and consequences from that, which is eventually the phone gets taken, there's screaming and shouting, everyone gets upset, somebody storms out, it leads into now there's consequences of the red zone. It's got nothing to do with the trigger that brought us into the red zone in the beginning. What we try to do is to create understanding around that, because kids will sometimes, young people in particular, into our adolescence, will create the red zones so that they can go to the coping strategies that they've always used, like overeating, like storming out, like going for a run, like whatever the coping strategies are that they might use. They nearly bring you into the red zone because that's the outcome they want. They don't even necessarily know they're doing it because they're not working out of the cortex, but they're working out of the reactional brain. So if we as parents know this, because we do have a rational brain, we're fully cooked. We're 25 plus, you've got a cortex, you're working out of the rational thinking, decision making part of your brain. We can understand that when we get those feelings, we can override them. Because that's the same feelings, reactional feelings as panic attacks, that's the same reactional feelings as low mood, depression, that's the same feelings as overeating, that's where anorexia or bulimia or any of the other issues, that's where it attacks. And I use the words rather than bad behavior, we creatively adjust our behavior to meet our needs. And it's that creative adjustment that will lead us into coping strategies that are maladaptive. Then they don't work. And they lead us back into the same consistent red zones. So I think for parents, if we understand it, what I'm hoping that your listeners get from listening to us today is not that we've worked it all out and we've got it all going on. I'm struggling at home with these things just the same as everyone listening is. But that actually, if we kind of talk it out and understand and create awareness for ourselves, we can see, okay, so actually my teenage son or my teenage daughter, they're just being a teenager and they're reacting in this way. I'm not on my own with this. Every other household is the same. I always say to mums, you're going to get the worst of them and the best of them, and us as dads need to know our roles. I know we'll come on to that with parenting, but when it comes to this areas of social media, we've got to lead the way. This is not a case of, well, I'm 52 and this is the way I do things, it's okay for me to be on my phone 24/7. That's not acceptable. We've got to lead the way where we're saying this is a household boundary issue, and we put phones away and we eat at the dinner table. We put phones away and we eat breakfast together. We put phones away at 10 o'clock, whatever the agreed times are, age appropriate, because every age is different. Because we've got to be the first to say, I'm putting my phone down too. And I have certain times of the day where I'll try and do that. Now, when kids have gone to bed, I might check in on things because I have a bit of work to do or something. But when we find ourselves just aimlessly scrolling and then we're giving out to our kids, sorry, but we really need to step up and realise we're role modelling inappropriateness.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, listening to what you're saying, if you throw puberty and hormones and everything into the works as well, and body shape is going to change, and the whole thing back to the body image. Wow, there's a lot going on there. But do you know what? From listening to you, and I think again of clients, and I know you do this in your centres as well, a lot of it, so much of it, when you talk about the red zones and the green zones and creating a red zone for a reason, for a purpose, so much of it, if we were to simplify that, to me comes back to love. Yeah. Doesn't it really? Attention. Like it's I remember reading a book on psychology of children years and years ago, and it talked about the Mona Lisa smile. Mm-hmm. That a child will, when they're very small, be so bold they'd rather get a slap than no attention at all. So and then even when they got the slap, you'd see one side of the smile is up and the other is down. So they're or you don't see the smile part. They're happy that they got attention of some kind. So I think really, we're talking about behaviours being passed on, but overall for the body image, adolescents, you're right, are going through so much. And I'm like you, Stewie. I have 3 girls, so we've hormones everywhere. Same with guys, obviously, in your house. But it is about talking it through, isn't it? If my girls say, do I look okay in this, or I'm not happy with my bum's big or whatever. But of course, they might have heard me say that to Paul. Paul, does my bum look big in this? Say yes. I would say no. I'll kill you if you say yes. So again, we're talking about, where does the whole, besides social media, be careful of, we've so many parents. Recently someone said to me, I have struggled with my weight and I never had that chat with my daughter. I had issues and I never had that chat. And then there's an understanding, which is love and care, and I'm doing this because I love you. So so guys, there's a lot, as we're both saying, we're not the perfect parents, we're just going on our experience, and it's lovely to share it. So we have that's one of our topics covered for body image and self-esteem, and I hope that you listeners have found it helpful, both parents or adolescents listening, and you take something out of it. And Stewie, thank you so much again. That was really interesting. I'm always fascinated. I hear something new every time I talk with or hear you, which is great. So thank you so much, and we look forward to listeners to another podcast. Stewie, thank you so much for coming in.
Total pleasure. Thanks so much.